The Watergate scandal began as a seemingly minor break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. in June 1972. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a clumsy burglary carried out by a group of men who were poorly equipped, poorly disguised, and quickly caught. Yet beneath this simple crime was a much larger story, one involving political espionage, sabotage operations, and a growing culture of paranoia within President Richard Nixon's administration. This culture had been intensifying for years as Nixon and his closest advisors believed that extremist groups, political opponents, and hostile media were bent on destroying his presidency. To understand why Watergate happened, it is important to examine the mindset inside the White House before the break-in. Nixon had long felt attacked by critics, particularly after the release of the Pentagon Papers in 1971, which revealed decades of government dishonesty surrounding the Vietnam War. Though the papers did not implicate Nixon himself, he feared similar leaks about his administration. In response, he authorized the creation of a special investigative unit known as the Plumbers, whose job was to stop leaks by any means necessary. This group eventually expanded its operations from plugging leaks to carrying out illegal political intelligence missions that blurred the line between national security and partisan advantage. The burglary at Watergate was part of a larger campaign by Nixon's re-election committee, the Committee to Re-elect the President, mockingly called CREEP by critics. This organization engaged in a range of questionable activities, including wiretapping, spreading propaganda, and carrying out covert operations against perceived enemies. The burglars were hired to plant listening devices and gather damaging information that could help Nixon win the 1972 election by undermining his Democratic opponents. While Nixon was already heavily favored to win, the administration's obsession with controlling every possible threat pushed them toward increasingly reckless acts. When the burglars were caught, the Nixon administration quickly shifted into cover-up mode. Instead of admitting wrongdoing or cutting ties with those responsible, high-level officials coordinated efforts to obstruct the FBI investigation. Hush money was paid to the burglars, false statements were prepared, and top aides attempted to direct the CIA to interfere with the FBI's inquiries by falsely claiming national security was involved. These moves escalated the situation into something far more serious, not merely a break-in, but a systematic effort by the president's inner circle, and eventually the president himself, to conceal illegal activities. The cover-up began unraveling when investigative journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post dug deeper into the burglary and discovered connections to the Nixon re-election committee. Their reporting, guided by confidential informants such as the famous Deep Throat, gradually exposed the scale of corruption within the administration. While the White House dismissed the stories as partisan attacks, the persistence of the journalists ensured the scandal stayed alive even as Nixon won the 1972 election in a historic landslide. The Senate eventually formed the Senate Watergate Committee, which conducted nationally televised hearings beginning in 1973. Millions of Americans watched as former White House staffers testified about the inner workings of the Nixon administration. The hearings revealed an atmosphere of mistrust, manipulation, and political warfare inside the White House. Many Americans were shocked to hear about the plotting, surveillance, and willingness to break the law among the president's closest advisors. What once seemed like isolated misconduct grew into a portrait of widespread abuse of presidential power. A major turning point came when former White House aide Alexander Butterfield revealed that Nixon had installed a secret taping system in the Oval Office. This system recorded nearly every conversation Nixon had during key moments of the Watergate cover-up. The existence of these tapes transformed the investigation, providing the possibility of direct, irrefutable evidence of the president's involvement. Nixon immediately resisted efforts to acquire the tapes, citing executive privilege and national security. His refusal ignited a constitutional showdown between the presidency and the judiciary. While the tapes became central to the scandal, the cover-up continued to crumble from within as many of Nixon's top advisors, H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, and John Mitchell, either resigned or were forced out of their roles. Their departures signaled to the public and investigators that something deeper was wrong in the administration. Subsequent testimonies and documents implicated these men in planning both the illegal operations and the concealment afterward. As the truth grew harder to suppress, the scandal deepened into a crisis of governance. Nixon's attempts to contain the scandal grew increasingly desperate, culminating in the infamous Saturday Night Massacre in October 1973, when Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox insisted on obtaining the Watergate tapes. Nixon ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire him. Richardson refused and resigned. Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus also refused and resigned. Finally, Solicitor General Robert Bork carried out the order. This dramatic sequence of events shocked the nation and led to widespread public outrage, strengthening calls for Nixon's removal. The outrage sparked by the Saturday Night Massacre pushed Congress to accelerate impeachment proceedings. The House Judiciary Committee began drafting articles of impeachment accusing Nixon of obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. Meanwhile, the courts continued pressuring Nixon to hand over the tapes, leading to the landmark Supreme Court case United States versus Nixon. In July 1974, the court unanimously ruled that Nixon must release the recordings, rejecting his claims of absolute executive privilege. When the tapes were finally released, they contained devastating evidence. Among the most damaging was the smoking gun tape from June 23, 1972, in which Nixon approved a plan to use the CIA to block the FBI's investigation. This revelation proved that Nixon had been involved in the cover-up from the very beginning. Faced with certain impeachment and removal by Congress, Nixon recognized that his presidency had become untenable. On August 8, 1974, he announced his resignation, becoming the first and only U.S. president to do so. The immediate effect of Watergate was a deep political shock throughout the country. Many citizens felt betrayed by Nixon, whose actions contradicted the constitutional principles he had sworn to uphold. Trust in government plummeted, marking a major shift in American political culture. For decades after, surveys showed persistent skepticism toward federal institutions, presidents, and politicians. Watergate contributed to a generational rise in political cynicism that shaped everything from voting behavior to media coverage. The scandal also had profound legal consequences. Many of Nixon's former aides were indicted, tried, and convicted for crimes, including perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. John Mitchell, the former Attorney General, became the highest-ranking U.S. government official ever imprisoned. The prosecution of these officials reinforced the principle that no one, not even those at the top of government, is above the law. This period produced some of the most visible political accountability in modern American history. Watergate prompted Congress to pass major reforms aimed at preventing similar abuses of power. Among the most important were the Ethics in Government Act, which created the independent counsel system to investigate high-ranking officials, the Federal Election Campaign Act amendments, which attempted to limit campaign financing abuses and increased protections for whistleblowers. These reforms reflected a national effort to rebuild public trust and ensure greater government transparency. Another lasting effect of Watergate was the strengthening of investigative journalism. Woodward and Bernstein became symbols of the power of the free press to hold government accountable. News organizations across the country invested more heavily in investigative units, recognizing that journalism played a crucial role in democracy. Watergate helped elevate the status of reporters and solidified the idea that the media, even when disliked by those in power, served as a check on government overreach. The scandal also reshaped presidential politics. Candidates were forced to become more transparent in their financial records, campaign practices, and personal conduct. Presidents after Nixon faced heightened scrutiny from both Congress and the press, increasing the complexity of managing the presidency. The scandal's ghost haunted later administrations, from Reagan's Iran-Contra affair to Clinton's impeachment to debates about executive power in the 21st century, each measured partly against the lessons of Watergate. Internationally, Watergate damaged America's reputation. Allies questioned the stability and integrity of U.S. leadership, while adversaries used the scandal as evidence of American political weakness. However, some observers noted that the peaceful removal of a corrupt leader demonstrated the strength of American democratic institutions. The rule of law prevailed over political loyalty, offering a powerful example of constitutional resilience during a crisis. Nixon's resignation created an unusual transition of power. Vice President Gerald Ford became president and prioritized healing the country. His controversial decision to pardon Nixon just 1 month after taking office sparked national debate. Ford argued that the country needed to move forward, but critics claimed the pardon denied the American people full accountability. The political costs were heavy. Ford's popularity dropped, and many historians believe the pardon contributed to his defeat in the 1976 election. Over time, public perception of Watergate evolved. Some came to view Nixon as a tragically flawed leader, deeply ambitious, often brilliant, but consumed by insecurity and mistrust. Others focused on the broader lessons that the concentration of power in the executive branch must always be checked, and that democratic systems rely on transparency to function properly. Watergate became a case study in ethics, leadership, and constitutional governance, taught in classrooms and analyzed in political science for decades. Ultimately, the Watergate scandal reshaped the American political landscape in lasting ways. It exposed the dangers of unchecked executive power, highlighted the importance of accountability, and redefined the relationships between the president, Congress, the courts, and the press. The cause of Watergate lay in a culture of fear, secrecy, and political obsession within the Nixon administration. Its effect was a profound transformation of American democracy, a reminder that even in moments of corruption and crisis, the constitutional system has the capacity to correct itself and protect the republic from its own leaders.